Hey guys, Death Angel here, and a few subs have requested information on HarrP and FEMA. I'm still gathering up the FEMA documents, but here's the one for HarrP. And I'll put this in there. Once you read through this, you will understand the radar immediately. This is optical ring formation and ionization production in high power, high frequency heating experiments at HarrP. And this one's not too long, it's only 4 pages. So, observations of high frequency induced artificial optical emissions at the 3.6 megawatt HarrP facility show unexpected features not seen at the previous 960 kilowatt level. Optical emissions often form a bright rayed ring surrounding a central disk with sharp edges near the 50% power contour. Artificial bottom side layers and ionograms and positive perturbations in local electron content suggest the bullseye optical patterns are associated with localized enhancement in plasma density. And you'll also see in this document, I will leave in the description as always, it has photos as well. And I'm also going to include a video from Dutch Sense because he does a very good job of explaining it. I also tried to get the information that he had left, but it's already all been scrubbed from the internet, but I will find it. Where was I? We conclude that the optical bullseye patterns are a refraction phenomena and an indicator of ionization production within the transmitter beam from the radar stations, the transmitter beams, and it goes through it all through here. Once you read this, you'll understand my radar videos. High power, high frequency waves have a number of well-documented effects on the ionosphere, including excitation of optical emissions, irregularity generation, formation of density depletions, and self-focusing of the waves within depletions over a wide range of spatial scales. And we'll go back up here. Density cavities have the property of focusing the high-frequency waves toward their center, and this self-focusing effect is considered to be a primary factor in formation of both small-scale and large-scale structures because they're fake fronts, and a fundamental process behind the enhanced generation of optical emissions and other heating effects in the magnetic zenith at high latitudes. The first observations to show ring-like structures from a focused transmitter beam at HarrP were made between 3 and 5 UT on February 23, 2008. The transmitter was operated at 2.85 megahertz, targeting the second harmonic of the electron gyro frequency. Oh, right here also. Optical emissions, and when they say optical emissions, they mean glowing rings that you can actually see visually. Optical emissions first became apparent above the fading twilight at about 350 UT. And it also goes in here about talking about after midnight. Apparently, it affects their transmission, their ability to communicate, which is why they pump them all up at night, as well as also control the weather. The optical images showed complex spatial structure consisting of a center spot of enhanced emissions with a relatively sharp boundary near the 50% HarrP contour. That's the donut. And here, right here, this figure is included. I'll probably also put the picture in full screen to make it easier. This is what they actually look like visually, what you can actually see. And this was done in 2008. So you figure 12 years ago, 13 years ago. That's why we've been trying to warn you guys. But it's pretty incredible. Look at this shit. We were right the whole time, and they all kept telling you guys we were all crazy. None of us knew what we were talking about. Optical images from the HarrP site looking up and from the Delta Junction. When you read through here, Delta Junction is a remote site that was not really publicized about, but it was right by HarrP. And it will also say in here about it. Hang on. Ring fragments generally appear as a chain of discrete rays elongated along the magnetic field. And this is how they studied it. Ionograms acquired every 5 minutes. And here's the chart right here. The black line is the artificial. This is the natural background right here. And this is the artificial created background. Secondary satellite traces on the bottom side were apparent during some of the most intense heating events. And then we'll go through here the altitudes and everything, and when they're talking about the magnetic zenith. Total electron content. And this is the stuff that they're exciting because it talks about super thermal electrons down here. In the artificial layer derived from the ionicide trace in figure 2 were homogeneous, it would correspond to an increase right here, units in the vertical. If the layer were additionally assumed to be Gaussian in the horizontal direction with a full width, matching the diameter of the central spot in the optical ring pattern. However, because the transmitter remained on continuously and the satellite ray paths typically intersected both beam positions, no background measurement was available during similar conditions on the following night. However, when the transmitter operated in the 2-minute on, 2-minute off mode, a clear correlation with the transmitter was seen on a pass over a receiver approximately 66 miles southwest of the HarrP transmitter. And that's what I'm saying. They can jet the energy even farther away from its source. We now examine the ray paths and the power distribution in the transmitter beam and refraction by artificial density enhancement. These are the beams that I show you guys coming out of the radar. The little bubbles that pop, everything. It's all in here. The artificial, like I said, when I say the sky's going crazy, or crackling skies, I also say you can tell when the sky's going totally crazy on radar, is added only when it exceeds the background density to minimize the effects of the unknown gradient above the peak. Transmitter rays at 2.85 megahertz are able to penetrate the ionosphere almost everywhere but reach the upper hybrid resonance. High-frequency rays originating between 4 degrees and 12 degrees zenith angle are deflected away from the beam center and bunch closely together as they cross. Those are those weird waves that are crossing each other that I have on the radars that are moving towards each other, the scalar waves. The high power density in this region correlates well with the observed optical rings, while the region between 4 degrees and 12 degrees would be expected to have few emissions, the high-frequency waves being diverted outward into the ring. Affecting the basic result of high-frequency waves being deflected into the ring enhancement power density well away from the beam center. And that's how you can see those beams being fired out, yet the effect is not right on the beams. Sometimes it is, when it looks like it's, what do I call it, a fire hose, spraying a fire hose. That's directly on the beam. And when it looks like it's burning off of a rope, that's also directly off the energy. But it can also be shot well away from the beam center. Previous reports of annular optical structures produced by high-frequency heating include intentional ring production by spatial modulation of the beam and generation of empty rings at extremely high HarrP. Those empty rings are the little bubble pops. They just pop up like a little bubble. That's what those are right here. Generation of empty rings into well-known magnetic zenith spot, which I don't know what that is. I don't know where that is or what that is. Our ray tracing analysis clearly shows that density enhancements at lower altitudes can redirect transmitter beam power into an annular structure well away from the beam center by refraction, which is why the rings pop up. Right here, 2008 experiments, the ring structures were most pronounced. Damn it, get out of here. The ring-like structures were most pronounced immediately after the beam changed positions, consistent with refraction off the edge of a density enhancement, formed while the beam was in the previous position. The tendency for the rings to parallel scalloping in the edge of the central spot is also hard to explain without invoking refraction. Follow-on experiments where the transmitter was turned on and off at a single beam position showed the bullseye pattern to develop gradually from an initial diffuse glow over tens of seconds to a few minutes, consistent with timescales for production of artificial density enhancements. And here's another photo of it, like an upside-down top hat, which you will hear from Dutch Sense. Ray tracing at 2.85 megahertz through the background ionosphere perturbed by a localized layer of additional ionization, ionized sky. The concentration of transmitter power to either side of the center would produce a ring. It's all from the towers. All the towers. Thermal redistribution of plasma by a pressure bulge at the higher altitudes, which is what makes it form like a top hat shape. Suppression of recombination by electron temperature increases. And this is where I was talking about the superheated electrons. Ionization of the atmosphere by impact of superthermal electrons. And then here's where they use the pattern, or the mathematics that they lay out right here. How they use to calculate the scale and the power. Let's go back up here. No, that's on the next one. And then on the conclusions, multi-site optical observations of ionospheric heating experiments at HarrP since the facility reached full power in 2007 show the common occurrence of spot within ring bullseye patterns during strong heating. During these same periods, artificial secondary layers in ionogram data and transmitter produced increases indicate that significant density enhancements are being produced on the bottom side of the F region where the power density is higher due to proximity to the transmitter. Which is why you will see the skies crackling right over top of the radars, those huge blasts coming right out of the radars that just wipe out the weather. It's all manufactured. The resulting bullseye patterns can therefore be considered as an indicator of ionization enhancement at lower altitudes in the central part of the transmitter beam. Estimates of ionization rates required to produce the observed density enhancements within the temporal constraints of the experiments require 10% or less of the energy available from the transmitter, and match well with rough estimates of ionization rates from the intensity of the optical emissions. So they can do that. They can control the weather with 10% of the power that those transmitters have, which is why you see the weather going crazy even away from, you'll see 3 states away, say 3 states away from where the radars are blowing off, the weather's going crazy. Because it refracts. They got it all artificially controlled. And you can come down here, right here. Here's all the references. There's plenty of studies to go through, guys. You can find out how this stuff works, how it all works, and then you'll understand the radar better. But read this. I'm going to leave it in the description. I'm going to include Dutch Sense's video after this because he did a great job of explaining it. And I'll leave this document in the description. But other than that, that's it. Death Angel out. See ya.
Hey everybody, Dutch Sense here. 11:44 a.m. Central Time on Wednesday, March 9th, 2016. And guys, for longtime viewers and new viewers, I'm going to make this short and sweet. I'm having a good day and a good yesterday as well when we found the news that something that I caught flack on for multiple years has now been verified and experimented on by the U.S. military. And what I'm talking about here are the bullseye ring-shaped plasma rings that form off of high-power radio transmission, radio waves, and this is done at experiments up at HarrP, confirmed by the Air Force Research Laboratories, showing the ring formation, explaining how it forms, why it forms, and that it's not just at HarrP, it's any high-frequency pulse that's targeted. Now, high-frequency pulses occur from NEXRAD radar stations in pulse mode. Normally, radar operates in the microwave bands, so in the gigahertz, but it pulses in the megahertz bandwidth, which overlays and coincides with the same megahertz bandwidths that they've used at HarrP and other high-frequency facilities to generate these plasma rings. And this is visible. This is actually happening up in the upper ionosphere, and they describe it as an upside-down top hat shape that reaches down from the ionosphere into the upper atmosphere or lower ionosphere. And that's what we see here. Compare here of the HarrP rings from radar stations to the HarrP rings from HarrP. And these are smaller, of course, and they're less powerful. That's why we're not seeing actual visible plasma form off of this down here to the south at the radar stations. But the effect produces an actual wind rotation above the transmitter. There's actual excitement that happens. Particle exchange, electron cascade, storm formation. And we've documented this over and over again. For instance, Dover, Delaware on the East Coast, Large radar pulse comes out of the Air Force Base there, and several hours later, severe storms kick up, and the only spot to get an actual tornado warning is directly over the transmitter at the base. Just one of hundreds of examples. The U.S. military has created multiple plasma spheres in the atmosphere, observed those using radar. People said it was impossible to see this stuff on radar, and that the rings we were seeing were birds and bugs. That's what they said they were. You can go read the skeptic forums, huge forum talking about how Dutch Sense is just seeing birds and bugs, that these are birds and bugs. Now we know it's not. The experiments were done to prove that rotation, wind rotation, forms above a transmitter. So this is already proved by MIT scientists that you can literally generate a vortex above a transmitter, and their idea is to generate tornadoes to produce power. Okay, so we can go down the list here on all the different documentation of high power transmissions, lasers stripping ions in the atmosphere to produce cloud condensation nuclei. That may sound complex. Let me just describe it like this. A high power transmission strips particles in the air that then collect water molecules and form into clouds and precipitation, as described by Michio Kaku in this video here. I'm going to put a link down below to this post so you guys can come over and check it out. Also, they came out further and described it that they can do it with two beams, that one beam can strip the CCN, form plasma, and the other beam can pump it up and sustain it. So they generate plasma with one, hit it with the other beam, sustain it. That's what the U.S. military has done at length. That's how they sustain the plasma ball in the atmosphere. They announced that back in 2013. But now we have it, guys. Again, look at the diagram that's included with this, and look at the date that this all occurred on. They're doing this experiment here, and I've got the PDF here provided by the dtic.mil, okay, November of 2011. Now, was there a guy online that was going through a huge catastrophe and persecution over researching HarrP rings up at HarrP and at radar stations in November of 2011? There sure was. And now they call it HarrP ring. Now, the way this all happens, there's an energy exchange where the beams interact. You can imagine also this can happen up in the ionosphere with just one transmitter, either dueling transmitter. This is Lieutenant Thomas Bearden's diagram here provided on scalar, but the scalar is just nothing more than an area where the energy exchange occurs. Like at CERN, they're doing experiments on the scalar Higgs boson, and we're talking about an area just like at CERN where they're using microwaves and klystrons. You'd have to look up CERN and understand what I'm talking about here, but that they use banks of klystrons. Klystrons are basically what powers the NEXRAD radars here in the States. Banks of them, though, put together to power that beam at CERN. The beam at CERN is nothing more than microwave. You can look it up. So when we're talking about the scalar exchange, this is something that was controversial science, but now it's proved. The plasma that forms at a distance from the transmitter is not subject to the square inverse law, that it doesn't dissipate at a distance, that an excitement occurs at a distance when certain harmonics are reached. As described in this paper, they talk about the harmonics, they talk about the level, the megahertz bandwidth that they're using here to generate it. But I can already tell you, other megahertz bandwidths have been used, not just the single megahertz, going up into the teens, even up into microwave bands. It's been done. And again, the experiments have already been done. This is not my take on it. You can just go read it. So the whole debate was whether or not this was possible, right? Everybody said, oh, it's not possible that this could happen, that radar stations could generate this. Well, now they've proved that the high frequency pulses generate plasma at a distance from the transmitter in the shape that we're seeing here. This isn't background clutter, and it's not birds and bugs. If it was background clutter, all the radar stations would show it. There's many more radar stations in the location here, but only the locations that were inducing that plasma formation. And this is not visible to the human eye. It's reflective, though, on radar. It's now proved this is reflected on radar. So what we're seeing here, this screenshot from October 2011, was a day where the radars were in excessive operation and they were pumping too much frequency into the upper atmosphere, into the ionosphere. It then caused a plasma reflection and CCN formation, and within days you have storms. CCN, again, cloud condensation nuclei, the precursor to rain, as proved from the laser pulses that Michio Kaku was talking about. So all I've got to say about this, finally, guys, is just it's been 5 years of trying to prove the case, and I understand skepticism. Look, I had to go pull all the data because I'm trying to find out what's going on here. I don't buy the story that it's birds and bugs. So I'm going to leave one more link down below in this video. You're going to have a link to this post here that I'm talking about, and then we're going to take you all the way back to my post that goes back to 2010, basically all the different PDFs, all the different institutions that have studied this, links to everything that we've talked about over the years, how radar is used to observe these things. People said it was impossible to observe it on radar too, you remember? They said, oh, you can't use radar to observe HarrP, yet that's how they observe the things that form above HarrP and the transmitters in general, not just HarrP. I mean, when we talk about HarrP, there's other facilities. The Europeans, I've reported on this, are building 5 new HarrP-type facilities that are 10 times bigger. 100,000 antenna elements at one facility alone, and we're talking about 5 over the course of multiple countries. All 5 facilities, as you can see on the screen here now, the diagram, they're all designed to be targeted at a certain point, just like what we're talking about here, and to superheat and produce that plasma over Northern Europe. Now, these superheated regions, of course, this begs the question, missile defense. Superheated regions of plasma in the upper atmosphere above a transmitter, far from the transmitter. That then leads us into the military aspect, and then that leads us into why I was censored, and of course, the whole information was obfuscated for 5 years. Here we are now in 2016, and we have finally the proof, the military documentation of them calling it a HarrP ring and bullseye shape. Everybody said it was impossible, that it couldn't happen. Well, now you know it is possible. So if it's possible with a high frequency pulse from HarrP, then we're just talking about power thresholds here. Then the debate comes in, how much power does it take to produce that plasma, that ionization? Is it 750,000 watts like what we see at the next rad stations? Everybody said it was impossible. Now we know it's possible. Now it's just a matter of doing those experiments with the radars next to find out the full deal on how far this goes down the list. How many other systems are producing their own rotation above the transmitter. If microwaves can induce rotation above the transmitter, as proved in the laboratory, and we have microwave transmitters all the way across the country, high power radar systems, microwave, that could be a problem. Now that we know it induces rotation, now that we know high-powered systems can also form plasma superheated regions in the upper atmosphere, of course, heat and cold mix, rotation forms. Add in CCN and actual moisture to that, we've got storm formation. Unintentional. Just from a radar system that would be used to observe the weather in conjunction with multiple other high-powered systems all the way across the country now. Does it have a cumulative effect? Of course it must have a cumulative effect. So the debate as to whether or not it was possible, quote unquote, is now over. So now we need to go to the next level, and I will not take any other debate on the topic. I won't accept it. I mean, before I'd be willing to listen and, counter with going to find more information. But at this point, everybody who said it was impossible, all the people who called me a conspiracy theorist for doing scientific research and providing all the links on everything that I find. This isn't Bigfoot, guys. This is actual science we're talking about here. And I'm glad I was on the cutting edge of it. I caught a lot of heck over the years. My name was ruined. They listed me as a threat 2 months prior to their experiments here. I was listed as a threat on the Department of Homeland Security website for researching this topic. 2 months later, they do the experiments. The U.S. military does the experiments right after I'm smeared over HarrP rings on the DHS website. And my viewers, not just me, they listed you guys too. If you're watching my video, they said you're a threat because you're researching this information. You're watching my videos. You must be a threat too. It was outrageous. 9/11, 2011. Oh man, to see your name listed on a government site for researching this topic, and now to be proved right 5 years later, HarrP rings. Literally at HarrP. How ironic, but there it is, guys. So much love, and I figure I'll show this to you and just put the link down below for everything that I'm talking about here. If you're new to the topic, I've got hours of descriptions of each PDF that we discovered over the years and tied it all together pretty much last year on the radio show, and then left it hanging till now that we have actual ring terminology that they're talking about. You know, again, a lot of people told me, you'll never find anything where they call it a HarrP ring. Well, there it is. So much love, guys. Much love.